The struggle of the forgotten worker. Austin Bohr had learned long ago that survival in this unforgiving world wasn't about gaining recognition or basking in glory. It was about doing the work, no matter how small or insignificant it seemed to those around him. It was about keeping his head down, pushing through the insults, and always making sure he brought something to the table, no matter how unglamorous it might be. As a janitor aboard Station 227, Austin's job was clear. His responsibility was the cleanliness of the station's lower levels, where the work was dirty, the hours were long, and the respect was nearly non-existent. But none of that bothered him. He knew the routine, and it gave him a sense of stability, a thread of normalcy in an otherwise chaotic life. It wasn't much, but it paid the bills. And the bills were all he had left. The first thing Austin noticed as he scrubbed the floors was the sound of laughter from a group of Garians, merchants who passed through the lower levels every few weeks to do business with the local residents. They were known for their snide comments and their inability to look at him without mocking the simplicity of his job. Today was no different. "Look at that," one of them sneered, clicking his mandibles in a sound of disbelief. A human still using such primitive cleaning tools. How quaint. Primitive, Austin muttered to himself, wiping the floor in a rhythmic motion, his mop sweeping away the day's dirt. He wasn't one for confrontation, especially not with species that treated him like an insect beneath their boot. But the words stung. The Garians always thought they were above him, and their sneers only reinforced the idea that humans were at the bottom of the social ladder on the station. Their comments became a low hum in the background of his mind as Austin focused on the task at hand. The work wasn't glamorous, but he was good at it. He'd learned the most efficient ways to clean, not just by experience, but by paying attention to the little things that others overlooked. He knew where the messes would be the thickest, where the hidden dirt lay, and how to make sure that everything, no matter how dirty, was spotless by the time he was done. Machines couldn't do that. They lacked the human touch, the adaptability that only people like Austin possessed. Austin chuckled quietly to himself. The Garians thought they were superior because they came from wealthier backgrounds, but they didn't have the persistence that humans like him had. Their riches might make them feel untouchable, but for all their fancy gadgets, they couldn't get their hands dirty the way he did. "Hey, human," one of the Garians shouted, breaking Austin's train of thought. "You missed a spot." Austin didn't look up. Instead, he moved the mop over the floor, erasing the residue of their jeers just as easily as he erased the grime. Their words no longer bothered him. He'd heard it all before. He'd learned to ignore it and keep working. That's all that mattered, right? His sister, Sophia, relied on him. His mother needed the medical supplies, and he wasn't going to let anyone's mockery get in the way of what he needed to do. The Gan merchant's laugh rumbled through the hall as the group walked away, their attention already shifting to the next piece of entertainment in their lives. Austin continued cleaning, his thoughts wandering for a moment. His sister was doing well at the academy. Top marks again, he thought. She was the one with the bright future, the one who had the chance to escape this station and make something of herself. His mother, on the other hand, was getting worse. The treatments weren't working as well as they had in the beginning, and each month, the medical bills grew higher. Austin had managed to keep up, working extra shifts and picking up odd jobs around the station, but the stress was mounting. He couldn't keep up forever. The gang collectors had already started to knock on their door, reminding them of the growing debt. It was a weight he carried alone, hidden beneath his tired eyes and constant motions as he worked. His chrono beeped, signaling that it was time for his mandatory break. Austin glanced at the clock. No time for a real break today. The plasma conduit in Sector 220 was down, and the commerce hub was about to enter lockdown. That meant there would be less time to finish the cleanup, and less time meant more credits. His supervisor, Grits, a gruff Vulcan who had a penchant for reminding Austin of his place, wouldn't care if he took an extra break. If the work didn't get done, the station would lose money. That was all that mattered to people like Grits. Austin gripped his mop and walked past the area designated for his break. Instead, he veered toward the access panel that led to the maintenance corridor. He knew there was a shortcut that would take him to the hub without running into any of the security lockdowns. It wasn't against the rules per se, but it wasn't the standard route either. Grits wouldn't approve if he found out, but Grits didn't matter to Austin. The credits mattered. The work mattered. As he passed through the narrow hallways and made his way to the commerce hub, Austin caught sight of a few more individuals who seemed to look through him, as if he didn't exist. It was the nature of the lower sectors. Everyone was too busy with their own lives to notice anyone else, unless it was to scoff at their misfortune. But Austin didn't mind. He had his goals, and he wasn't about to let anyone derail them. Just as he was about to enter the hub, he caught sight of a pair of workers from the Terrian Academy. Tall, pale beings whose bodies were chalky white, their delicate skin unmarked by the wear and tear of station life. One of them actually took a moment to step around the wet floor sign, a small act of courtesy in this place where such things were rare. Austin nodded in appreciation, but the others simply walked right through the sign, leaving scorch marks on the floor where their feet had passed. More work, more credits, Austin reminded himself, moving toward the next task with the same unyielding focus he had every day. No one would appreciate him for the work he did, but he didn't need that. Not really. The bills would get paid. Mom would get her treatments. Sophia would finish her education and make something of herself. That was what mattered. And as long as he kept his head down, kept moving forward, he could make that happen. But today was different. As the station's automated announcements echoed over the intercom, Austin felt a shift in the air, a sudden awareness that something wasn't quite right. The usual hum of life aboard the station seemed quieter today, and there was an unease in the way the crew moved about their business. He tried to ignore it, but the feeling nagged at him. He continued to work, to scrub, to clean, but something deep inside him began to wonder. What if there was something more to this life? Something beyond the endless cycle of work, mockery, and struggle. His thoughts were interrupted by a loud voice calling out from the back of the station. It was Grits, his supervisor, barking orders as usual. Austin sighed. It was time to focus, but as he turned toward the command center, he had no idea that today would be the day his life would change forever. The ordinary routine he had lived by for so long was about to be shattered by something far more extraordinary than he could ever have imagined. The forgotten vessel. The clang of the station's metal corridors resonated through Austin's bones as he moved quickly down the maintenance hall. The moment he entered the commerce hub, the buzz of activity became more pronounced. Workers hurried from one duty to the next, some shuffling through crates of supplies, others haggling with vendors about stock prices. The entire place seemed to operate on autopilot, a constant hum of routine, with no real sense of purpose beyond getting the job done. Austin didn't mind. His part in the greater system was small, insignificant even, but necessary. The station had its way of doing things, and Austin had learned to accept his place within it. For the most part, he was invisible. But that had always been fine with him. It was easier that way. The plasma conduit in Sector 220 had been acting up for days, and the station's automated systems were unable to get the job done. He had been assigned to inspect the conduit, and if necessary, perform a manual repair. That meant crawling through the lower-level maintenance tunnels, a place few others had the stomach to venture. The station's power was fed by a sprawling web of plasma conduits, and when one failed, the entire section could experience a power outage. Austin had seen it before. It wasn't pretty. Lights flickered, doors malfunctioned, and systems went down. People didn't like that. It made them feel vulnerable, exposed. And when people felt exposed, they grew desperate. That was where the real trouble started. He passed through the maintenance corridor, where the flickering lights cast strange shadows across the walls. Here, the air always felt a bit thicker, as if the station was holding its breath, waiting for something to go wrong. The smell of grease and old wiring clung to the walls, a constant reminder of how much work was needed to keep this station running. Austin reached the access panel he needed, pulling out his toolkit and quickly getting to work. As he removed the panel and began inspecting the power relays, his thoughts drifted to his family. He thought about his mother, still bedridden, too weak to move without assistance. He thought about Sophia, his sister, whose intelligence and drive far exceeded his own. He had to keep going, had to keep working, or else everything they had fought for would slip away. His mother's health was deteriorating, and the medical treatments she needed to survive cost more than he could afford on his janitor's salary. Austin had been forced to take on more overtime hours, but it still wasn't enough. Every time he thought he was getting ahead, another bill would arrive, or a new complication would arise. That was the nature of their life aboard the station, a constant cycle of struggle and survival. Just as Austin was about to finish the repair, something strange happened. The lights flickered again, but this time, the station's internal systems seemed to shut down. The quiet hum of the station's engines stilled for a moment, replaced by a deep, unsettling silence. For a second, Austin thought he had made a mistake, that perhaps the repair wasn't as effective as he'd hoped. But then, something unusual caught his eye. Down the corridor, in the distance, he saw the faint outline of something that shouldn't be there. At first, he thought it was just his mind playing tricks on him. After all, he'd been working long hours with little sleep. But the figure grew clearer with each passing second. It was a ship, but not like any ship he had ever seen before. It was unlike anything that should have been docked here, let alone drifting through the maintenance tunnels. The vessel's hull was battered and scarred, covered in strange symbols and patterns that seemed to shift with the light. It had an angular, alien shape, devoid of the typical curves and smooth edges that defined the more familiar ships of the station. The colors of the ship were dark, almost absorbing the light around it rather than reflecting it. It moved silently, as though guided by some invisible force. Austin's heart skipped a beat as the vessel moved deeper into the hangar. He stood frozen, watching it glide past him, feeling an odd sense of awe mixed with a growing unease. The doors to the hangar began to close behind the ship with a loud mechanical whine, sealing it inside. This wasn't supposed to happen. No ships were supposed to enter the station without going through customs, without proper documentation. But this one had simply appeared, slipping through the station's defenses like a shadow. "Override," Austin muttered under his breath, rushing to the nearest control panel. His fingers flew across the interface, trying to access the system's mainframe, but nothing responded. The system was locked out. No access. It was as if the ship had triggered some sort of security protocol, preventing anyone from getting near it. His mind raced. There was no way this ship was legitimate. Its strange markings and the unregistered signature were proof enough that it wasn't from any known faction or species. It was abandoned. No doubt about it. Austin had seen enough salvaged vessels to know what that looked like, but this ship was different. There was something almost ancient about it. And it wasn't just the vessel itself. It was the feeling that lingered in the air, something that sent a chill down his spine. Austin's instincts told him to leave, to alert security or report it to someone higher up the chain. But a different thought crept into his mind. What if this was a once-in-a-lifetime opportunity? What if this ship held something valuable? A treasure buried within its rusted frame. This wasn't just some broken-down hulk of metal. No, there was something much more to this ship. His hand hovered over his comms device, but before he could make a decision, a deep rumble shook the hangar. The power seemed to surge back to life, and the lights flickered back on, revealing the ship in its entirety. Austin's breath caught in his throat. Something about the vessel seemed to hum with energy, like it was alive. As the doors sealed shut behind it, he knew that there was no going back. The ship's strange odor had taken hold of him, and curiosity outweighed caution. He began to move toward it, his steps hesitant but resolute. His mind raced with thoughts of the possibilities. What could this ship offer him? Information, technology. He didn't know, but one thing was certain. This discovery could change everything. For the first time in what felt like forever, Austin felt a surge of hope. The vessel sat silent in the hangar, the air around it thick with mystery. His handheld scanner beeped faintly as he pulled it out, running the device over the ship's surface. The readings were bizarre, giving off impossible power signatures that didn't match anything he had ever encountered before. The ship's hull was made of a material that defied analysis. His scanner flickered, trying to process what it was encountering, but nothing came back with a clear answer. That only intrigued him further. This was the kind of challenge he had always dreamed of, something so complex that it demanded attention, something that could prove his worth beyond the confines of his humble job. His eyes narrowed as he stepped closer to the vessel, moving cautiously along its length. The ship's surface was cool to the touch, yet there was an undeniable weight to it. The deeper he examined it, the more questions piled up in his mind. Who had built this ship? What happened to its crew? Why was it here, hidden away in the depths of the station? At the bottom of the vessel, he spotted what appeared to be an access hatch, hidden beneath a layer of grime. His fingers worked quickly to clear the debris, and when the hatch finally revealed itself, Austin felt a surge of excitement. This was it, the moment he had been waiting for. He pressed his palm to the panel and watched as the hatch slowly began to open with a hiss, releasing a cloud of stale air from within. What lay beyond the hatch could change everything. This wasn't just a broken ship. This was an opportunity. An opportunity for answers. An opportunity for power. And maybe, just maybe, an opportunity to escape the suffocating routine of his life aboard Station 227. With a deep breath, Austin stepped forward, ready to discover what lay inside. The hidden treasure. The air inside the ship smelled stale, but not entirely unpleasant. It was thick with the scent of old metal and decay, a far cry from the sterile, recycled atmosphere of the station. Austin stood on the threshold of the hatch, staring into the dimly lit interior, a sense of excitement mixed with apprehension flooding his senses. This was it, the moment of discovery. This ship, abandoned and hidden away for who knows how long, held secrets that could change everything for him. He stepped inside, his boots making a soft thud against the metal flooring. The interior of the ship was far more expansive than he had expected, stretching far beyond the cramped confines of typical station maintenance corridors. The walls, dark and jagged, seemed to absorb the light from his handheld scanner, making it hard to get a clear look at the surroundings. But there was something mesmerizing about the way the space seemed to stretch inward, as if it was bigger on the inside than it appeared on the outside. Austin moved deeper into the vessel, feeling the hum of energy that seemed to resonate beneath the surface of the walls. His scanner was still useless, sputtering out strange readings that made no sense at all. The usual power signatures were absent. Instead, there were faint pulses of energy, like echoes from a forgotten time, making the entire ship feel like it had been dormant for centuries before coming alive again in this moment. The walls themselves seemed to shimmer faintly as Austin passed, catching his attention in fleeting glimpses. Strange symbols and markings, etched into the metal, moved subtly as though they were shifting under the light of his torch. At first, he thought it was just the effect of his scanner's flickering light, but the symbols were undeniably changing, twisting and folding upon themselves in patterns he couldn't decipher. Some were familiar, resembling ancient human scripts, but most were entirely alien, beyond any form of writing he had ever seen. He took a deep breath, trying to calm the racing thoughts in his mind. He had to focus. If this ship was going to yield anything useful, he needed to keep a level head. As his eyes adjusted to the dim light, Austin noticed the walls around him were covered with intricate panels, some open, exposing empty wiring and control systems, while others were sealed shut with reinforced plates that looked like they hadn't been disturbed in ages. One panel, however, caught his eye. It was different from the others. This one was made of a smooth, polished material, almost like glass, and it had a faint glow to it, pulsing rhythmically. Austin's heart skipped a beat as he stepped closer. The markings on the panel seemed to form a pattern of some kind, and without fully understanding why, he reached out to touch it. As his fingers made contact, the panel immediately responded. A soft hum vibrated through the air, and the entire room seemed to shift. The glow intensified, revealing more of the strange script along its edges. The panel slid open with a low hiss, revealing a small chamber behind it, its walls lined with metallic shelving and containment units. Inside, there were rows of what appeared to be alien artifacts. Strange, organic objects that seemed to pulse with an energy all their own. Austin's breath caught in his throat as he took in the sight. These were no ordinary relics. He had seen his share of forgotten technology from the station's various salvage runs, but nothing like this. The items in front of him exuded an eerie, almost supernatural aura, their forms glowing faintly in the dark. His fingers itched with the desire to touch them, to learn what they were, but something told him that these artifacts were not to be handled lightly. This wasn't just some random assortment of discarded junk. It was something far more valuable. As Austin reached for the closest object, his attention was drawn to the back of the room. There, half hidden behind a large metallic structure, was a pedestal. On the pedestal stood something that immediately drew his gaze, a sleek suit of armor, unlike any design he had ever seen. It was large and imposing, but its form was graceful, almost organic. The armor had a fluid, seamless appearance, as though it had been grown rather than crafted. Its surface shimmered in the low light, shifting between shades of dark silver and iridescent blue, as if it were alive. Austin's pulse quickened. This was it. This was the prize, the one thing that had eluded so many others, the thing that could change his life forever. But as he stepped closer, he couldn't help but feel a sense of awe mixed with caution. There was something about the armor that was unnerving. It was as if it had been waiting for him, waiting for someone to come and claim it. His scanner was giving off erratic readings as he approached, unable to make sense of the power emanating from the suit. It was like nothing he had ever encountered. He reached out tentatively, his fingers brushing the cool surface of the armor. The moment his skin made contact, the room seemed to hum with energy. The armor shifted slightly, as though it were alive, adjusting its position ever so slightly. Austin took a step back, startled, but the armor remained still. He ran his hand along its surface, marveling at the seamless design. There were no seams, no joints, no visible mechanisms. It was as though the armor had been crafted from a single unbroken piece. He could feel the weight of it in his mind, the power it contained, the potential it held. This was far more than just a suit of armor. It was a weapon, a piece of forgotten technology. Something so advanced, so beyond the scope of human knowledge, that it could change the balance of power in the galaxy. Austin felt a twinge of fear in his chest, but he pushed it aside. This was his moment. He had found something incredible, something that could provide the answers he had been searching for. The question was, what would he do with it? His thoughts raced as he examined the armor more closely. It was unlike anything he had ever seen. The design was sleek, alien, but it also had a strange familiarity to it. The shapes of the armor seemed to flow in a way that mimicked the human body, as if it had been tailored specifically for someone like him. But there was no way to know for sure. He had no idea who the armor had been made for, or what kind of alien technology had created it. As Austin stood there, lost in thought, he noticed something that sent a chill down his spine. The ship had begun to hum again, and the lights flickered, casting strange shadows across the room. The sense of unease that had been lingering in the back of his mind suddenly intensified. Something was changing. Something was waking up within the ship. Without warning, the chamber doors slammed shut behind him with a deafening clang. Austin jumped back, his heart racing as he turned toward the exit, only to find it sealed tight. He was trapped. The ship was coming to life. And now, Austin was caught in the middle of it. For a moment, Austin stood frozen, the weight of the situation crashing down on him. He had no way of knowing what was happening or why, but one thing was certain. This ship wasn't abandoned. It wasn't dead. It had been waiting for him. And now that he had touched the armor, there was no turning back. The sound of shifting metal echoed through the chamber as the walls around him began to glow with an eerie light. Something was stirring within the depths of the ship. Austin could feel it. Whatever had been dormant for so long was beginning to awaken. And he had no idea what kind of power he had just unleashed. The awakening. Austin's breath came in quick, shallow bursts as the metallic doors slammed shut behind him. Panic rose in his chest, a cold knot of fear tightening in his stomach. The ship had come alive. The faint hum of its systems, barely perceptible before, now resonated through the walls, vibrating the air itself. The strange, alien energy was palpable, filling the space with an unnatural weight. He could feel it in his bones. This place was no longer a derelict vessel. It was something else entirely. A living, breathing thing, almost sentient in its movements. Austin glanced back at the sleek armor standing on its pedestal, its shimmering surface glowing faintly, as if responding to the ship's sudden surge of activity. The ship's pulse. The air around him seemed to pulse with energy, as though the ship was reacting to his presence. The lights overhead flickered on in rapid succession, casting the space in a series of unnatural flashes. The walls began to hum in sync with the lights, creating an eerie melody that sent shivers down Austin's spine. It felt as if the ship's heart had started beating, and he was caught in its rhythm, its unsettling cadence. He could see that the ship's control panels, which had once been dead and dormant, were now alive with glowing symbols and shifting lights. The markings on the walls, which had seemed like abstract patterns before, now appeared to be more coherent, almost purposeful. They moved, slithering across the metal like liquid ink, forming shapes and symbols that Austin couldn't quite understand. Some of them looked like writing, while others appeared to be maps or blueprints of the ship itself. Without fully realizing it, Austin's hand had moved toward one of the control panels. His fingers brushed the surface, and the ship responded immediately. A screen lit up, filled with incomprehensible symbols that danced across the screen, vanishing and reappearing in a fluid motion. It was an encrypted language, but the mere fact that it was interacting with him felt like a warning. It was as though the ship knew he wasn't supposed to be there. Yet, it was choosing to reveal itself to him anyway. A glimpse of the past. The room seemed to shift around him, and in a flash, he was no longer standing in the same place. The walls of the ship dissolved, and he found himself standing in the middle of an ancient battlefield. The air was thick with smoke. The ground cracked and scorched. He could see the faint silhouettes of figures moving in the distance, tall, imposing beings with strange, elongated limbs and glowing eyes. They fought with weapons that crackled with energy, their movements fluid and precise. Austin stumbled backward, his heart racing. The scene flickered like a broken hologram, the images fading and shifting as if he had stumbled into some kind of memory, an echo of the past. He reached out, but the vision vanished as quickly as it had appeared, leaving him standing in the dark, cold chamber of the ship once again. For a moment, he wondered if his mind was playing tricks on him. But the sensations, the sights, the sounds, the feeling of being transported, were too real to be a figment of his imagination. The ship, or whatever intelligence lay within it, was trying to show him something. It was reaching out to him, pulling him into its history, into its story. Austin's fingers trembled as he stepped away from the control panel. The ship wasn't just abandoned. It had a purpose, a history. It had seen battles and victories and losses. It had been a part of something far bigger than anything he could comprehend. And now, it had chosen him, or at least, he had become involved in its story whether he was ready for it or not. The armor's secret. The armor on the pedestal seemed to call to him, its surface now radiating a soft, otherworldly glow. Austin hesitated for only a moment before stepping forward, drawn to it by some magnetic pull he couldn't explain. As he approached, the ship's hum intensified, and the armor seemed to respond, shifting slightly, almost as if it were alive. The air around it shimmered, and Austin could swear he felt a strange warmth emanating from it, like it was waiting for him. He had already touched the armor once, but this time felt different. His heart pounded in his chest as he extended his hand toward it once again. This time, when his fingers brushed the surface, the armor reacted. A sharp electric pulse surged through him, sending a jolt of energy coursing up his arm. His vision blurred for a moment, and for an instant, he felt an overwhelming sense of power, as though he were connected to the ship itself. The armor's surface shifted, the once smooth metal becoming intricate and fluid, like liquid metal coursing and reshaping itself around him. The sensation was overwhelming, and for a split second, Austin felt as if he were one with the ship, like he had become a part of its ancient history. Suddenly, with a sharp hiss, the suit of armor unfurled, locking into place with a mechanical precision. It encased his body like a second skin, fitting perfectly, almost as if it had been designed for him. He could feel the weight of it, but it was unlike any armor he had ever worn. It was both light and heavy, soft and solid, a paradox that made his body feel as though it were suspended in time. The energy that had been flowing through him now centered on his chest, where a faint light pulsed in rhythm with his heartbeat. The armor responded to his movements, adjusting and adapting to his body. His senses sharpened, and he could feel the faint vibrations of the ship's systems echoing through the metal, as though it were communicating with him. The power, the connection, it was more than just technology. It was symbiosis. The ship's voice. Before he could fully process what had just happened, a deep voice filled his mind. It wasn't a voice in the traditional sense. No words, no sound, but a presence that radiated directly into his thoughts. The voice was both ancient and timeless, echoing across the vast reaches of space and time. It wasn't speaking to him in any known language, but the meaning was unmistakable. You are the one. You have awakened us. Now you must choose. The path ahead is fraught with danger, and the power you now wield will shape the future of your kind. Will you be the catalyst for change, or will you fall to the forces that seek to destroy all that we have built? The voice left him reeling, its weight pressing down on his mind. Austin stumbled backward, the force of the words sending him crashing into the side of the chamber. His breath caught in his throat as he tried to make sense of what had just happened. The armor, the ship, it had all come alive, and it had chosen him for something. The deep hum of the ship seemed to echo around him, the energy from the armor pulsing through his veins, filling him with a sense of purpose and power that he had never known. He wasn't just a janitor anymore. He wasn't just a forgotten worker in the bowels of a station filled with aliens who mocked him and treated him like dirt. No, he was something else now. He was part of something greater. The ship had awakened, and it had chosen him as its inheritor, its new pilot, its new champion. But as the weight of the decision pressed down on him, Austin realized that this was just the beginning. The path ahead would not be easy. He was no longer just fighting for survival. He was fighting for the future of humanity. The ship's voice echoed again, stronger this time, more insistent. The time has come, Austin Bohr. The future of your kind rests in your hands. Will you rise to the challenge? Austin's heart beat in his chest, his mind racing. He had no choice now. He had already stepped into a world beyond his understanding, and there was no turning back.